The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in Boston, Massachusetts, when Natalie Sullivan was elbow-deep in dishwater at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, and it changed everything she thought she knew about her future. Her hands trembled as she dried them on her apron, staring at the official seal on the envelope that bore her name in careful script, wondering who would write to a 22-year-old orphan who had nothing and no one. Inside, a lawyer's neat handwriting informed her that her Uncle Marcus, a man she had met only twice in her childhood, had died 3 months prior in the Arizona Territory, leaving her his cattle ranch outside a town called Chloride. The words blurred together as she read them again and again, trying to make sense of how her life had just transformed from scrubbing floors and dodging the boarding house owner's lecherous son to owning property out west. She left Boston 6 days later with everything she owned packed into a single carpet bag, her heart hammering with equal parts terror and exhilaration as the train carried her across a country she had only read about in books. The journey took nearly 2 weeks, rattling through states and territories that grew progressively more barren and beautiful, until finally she disembarked in Kingman with instructions to hire a wagon to Chloride. The June heat hit her like a physical blow when she stepped off the train, dry and relentless, so different from the humid summers back east that she immediately felt sweat prickle across her skin beneath her traveling dress. A grizzled man with kind eyes agreed to drive her the 15 miles to Chloride for $2, and she climbed into the wagon with her bag clutched to her chest, staring out at the endless expanse of desert and distant mountains. Chloride itself was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of weathered buildings clinging to the side of a mountain where silver mines had once promised fortune. The driver pointed out the general store, the saloon, the assayer's office, all of it coated in the same reddish dust that seemed to cover everything. When they turned onto the road leading to what he called the Sullivan Ranch, her stomach dropped. The property sprawled across a valley between rocky hills, but even from a distance she could see the disrepair. Fences sagged or lay broken on the ground. The barn roof had a gaping hole. The house itself looked like it might collapse in a strong wind, its paint peeled away to gray wood, one shutter hanging at a drunken angle. "Your uncle had a hard time of it these last few years," the driver said quietly as he helped her down. "Cattle business has not been kind to small operations. Lost most of his herd to drought and disease. Was fixing to sell before he passed, from what I heard." Natalie stood in the dusty yard, looking at the wreckage of her inheritance, and felt tears prick her eyes. She had been so foolish, dreaming on the train of a fresh start, of building something of her own. This was not a ranch. This was a graveyard for someone else's failed dreams. "You need me to wait, miss?" the driver asked, clearly expecting her to want to return to town immediately. She swallowed hard, straightened her spine, and shook her head. "No, thank you. I will be fine." He looked doubtful but tipped his hat and drove away, leaving her alone in the silence broken only by the wind whistling through gaps in the barn walls. She picked up her carpetbag and walked toward the house, testing each step on the porch before trusting it with her full weight. The door stuck, swollen in its frame, but yielded when she put her shoulder to it. Inside, dust covered every surface, and she could see evidence of mice in the corners. The furniture was sparse but functional: a table, 2 chairs, an iron stove, a narrow bed in the corner with a stained mattress. She set her bag down and sank onto one of the chairs, letting herself feel the full weight of her situation. She had $23 to her name. She knew nothing about ranching, nothing about cattle or horses or how to fix fences. She had no family, no friends, no one to turn to for help. The sensible thing would be to sell the property for whatever she could get and return east, find another position in service, marry some clerk or shopkeeper if one would have her. But as she sat there in the dusty silence, she felt something stubborn kindle in her chest. Her uncle had lived here, had tried to make something of this place. Maybe she could too. Maybe this wreck of a ranch was her only chance to be something more than someone's servant, someone's wife, someone's burden. She spent the rest of that first day cleaning, sweeping out the worst of the dust and mouse droppings, scrubbing the table and stove until her hands were raw. She found a pump outside that yielded rusty water after much cranking, and she used it to fill a bucket and wash the windows, letting light into the dim interior. In a cupboard, she discovered a few tins of beans and a sack of cornmeal that the mice had not breached, and she managed to get the stove working well enough to make a meager supper. As the sun set, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple, she sat on the porch steps and ate her beans, looking out at the land that was somehow hers. She did not hear the rider approach until he was close, the sound of hoofbeats making her jump to her feet, her heart suddenly pounding. The man who rode into her yard was tall and lean, sitting his horse with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his entire life in the saddle. He wore dusty jeans, a faded blue shirt, and a hat pulled low over his face. When he dismounted, she saw that he was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin and sharp features that might have been handsome if he smiled. He did not smile. "You are Marcus Sullivan's niece?" he asked, his voice rough and direct. "I am, Natalie Sullivan." She stayed on the porch, trying to look more confident than she felt. "And you are Asher Thompson. I have the property to the east." He gestured vaguely toward the hills. "Heard Marcus had family back east. Did not expect you to actually come out here." There was something in his tone that put her back up, a judgment that she was too soft, too Eastern, too female to handle this place. "Well, I did. This is my property now." He looked around the yard, his expression unchanging. "You know anything about ranching, I will learn. Right." He turned back to his horse, clearly dismissing her, but paused with his hand on the saddle. "You got any cattle left?" "I do not know. I only arrived today." "There are maybe 20 head in the west pasture if they have not wandered off. Your fences are a disaster." "They will be gone by the end of the week." She felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment and frustration. "Then I will fix the fences." He actually turned back to look at her then, something that might have been amusement flickering in his dark eyes. "You even know what a fence looks like, Miss Sullivan?" "I am not an idiot, Mr. Thompson." "Never said you were, but there is a difference between not being an idiot and being able to keep a ranch running." He swung into his saddle, settling his weight. "Your uncle was a good man." "Stubborn, but good. It would be a shame to see this place fall apart completely." "Then perhaps you should offer helpful advice instead of criticism," she snapped before she could stop herself. He stared at her for a long moment, and she thought he might ride off in offense. Instead, he said, "I will be back tomorrow morning, early. If you are serious about learning, I will show you what needs to be done. But I am not going to coddle you, and I am not going to waste my time if you are just going to sell out in a month." "I am not going to sell. We will see." He turned his horse and rode off into the gathering dusk, leaving her standing on the porch with her hands clenched into fists, unsure whether to be grateful or furious. He arrived the next morning just after dawn, when the air was still relatively cool and the light was soft across the desert. Natalie had barely slept, unused to the sounds of the wild country, the coyotes howling in the distance, the wind making the house creak and groan. She had risen early and made coffee from the ground she found in a tin, bitter and strong, and was drinking it on the porch when Asher rode up with a second horse on a lead. "Can you ride?" he asked without preamble. I have ridden, in parks, with a side saddle. He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a grunt of disgust. This is not a park, and that is not a side saddle, but the horse is gentle. You will manage. She looked at the animal, a placid-looking bay mare with kind eyes, and felt a flutter of nervousness. But she set down her coffee cup and walked over, refusing to show fear. What do I do? He spent the next 20 minutes teaching her to mount from the left side, how to hold the reins, how to sit and move with the horse. His instructions were curt but clear, and he did not mock her when she nearly slid off the other side on her first attempt. When she was finally seated, skirts hiked up in a way that would have scandalized Boston society, he nodded. Good enough. Follow me. They rode out across the property, and in the daylight, Natalie could see more clearly the scope of what she had inherited. The land itself was beautiful in its stark way. Rolling hills covered in scrub brush and cacti, rock formations jutting up like ancient monuments. But the ranch was in terrible shape. Asher pointed out each problem as they encountered it: broken fence posts, empty water troughs, the dried remains of dead cattle that no one had buried. The barn had clearly not been mucked out in months. The equipment was rusted, some of it broken beyond repair. Your uncle gave up about a year ago, Asher said as they stopped on a rise overlooking the property. After his wife died, he just lost the will, drank more, worked less. I tried to help, but he was too proud to take charity. His wife, Natalie turned to him, startled. I did not know he married. Abigail, good woman, she died in childbirth, the baby too. His voice was flat, matter-of-fact, but she heard the sadness beneath it. That is when things started to fall apart. She sat in silence, feeling the weight of tragedies she had known nothing about, of family she had never met. Her uncle had been more than a name on a lawyer's letter. He had loved and lost and given up, and now she was here trying to resurrect what he had abandoned. You are wondering if it is worth it, Asher said, watching her face. I am wondering how anyone survives out here, she admitted. It seems so hard, so lonely. It is both those things. He turned his horse back toward the barn, but it can also be good if you are willing to work for it. Come on, I will show you how to mend a fence. The next hours were a brutal education in how little she knew and how much she needed to learn. Asher did not believe in gentle instruction. He showed her once how to dig a post hole, how to set a post, how to string wire, and then handed her the tools and watched her struggle. Her hands blistered within the first hour. Her back ached from bending and digging in the hard, rocky soil. The sun climbed higher and the heat became oppressive, sweat soaking through her dress until it clung to her skin. He offered her water from his canteen, but no sympathy, working alongside her at his own section of fence, moving with the efficient ease of long practice. By midday, she had managed to set 3 posts. They were crooked and probably not deep enough, but they were standing. She stepped back, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt. Not terrible, Asher said, inspecting her work. They will hold for now. It was the closest thing to praise he had offered, and she felt a ridiculous surge of pride. What next? Next you learn to pace yourself, or you will collapse from heat stroke. He nodded toward a scraggly tree that offered a patch of shade. Break, eat something. She had packed the last of the beans and some hardtack from the cupboard, and they sat in the shade, eating in silence. She snuck glances at him, trying to understand this taciturn man who was helping her for reasons she did not quite comprehend. His hands were calloused and scarred, his face weathered by sun and wind. There was a hardness to him, but also a competence that she found herself wanting to trust. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally. He chewed his hardtack slowly before answering. "I told you, your uncle was a good man." That is not really an answer. He looked at her then, his dark eyes direct and unreadable. "No, I suppose it is not. Maybe I am just curious to see if you are as stubborn as you pretend to be. Most Eastern women would have been on the train back home by now." "I am not most Eastern women." "Maybe not." He stood, brushing crumbs from his jeans. Back to work. They worked until the sun began to descend, completing a long stretch of fence that at least looked functional. Natalie's hands were bleeding in places where blisters had burst, and every muscle in her body screamed with exhaustion. When Asher finally said they were done for the day, she nearly wept with relief. "Tomorrow we will check on your cattle," he said as they rode back to the house. "Make sure they are still here. Then you need to figure out your water situation. The creek is low this time of year. You are coming back tomorrow?" She tried to keep the desperate hope from her voice. "I said I would teach you. I keep my word." He paused. "But you need supplies. Food, medicine, proper tools. You have money." "Some. It will not last long. You need to sell something or find work in town until you can get a calf crop to market." The reality of her situation settled over her like the dust that coated everything. Even with help, even if she learned everything she needed to know, she did not have the resources to make this work. How long does it take to get cattle ready to sell if you are starting from 20 head? Years. And that is assuming you do not lose any, which you will. She slid off her horse, her legs shaking with fatigue, and stood looking up at him. "So what you are saying is I should give up?" "I am saying you should be realistic." "And if I am not ready to be realistic yet?" Something shifted in his expression, a slight softening around the eyes. "Then I will be back tomorrow morning. Same time." He rode off before she could thank him, leaving her standing in the yard as the light faded. She dragged herself inside, too tired to even properly clean up, and fell into bed still wearing her filthy dress. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that she had survived one day. She could survive another. Asher came every morning for the next 2 weeks, arriving with the dawn and staying until the heat of midday drove them to rest. He taught her to recognize sick cattle from healthy ones, how to check for hoof problems and parasites. He showed her how to clean and maintain the few tools she had, how to ration her supplies, how to read the sky for weather changes. Slowly, painfully, she began to understand the rhythms of the ranch, the constant cycle of maintenance and vigilance that kept everything from falling apart. Her hands toughened, the blisters giving way to calluses. Her skin darkened under the relentless sun despite the bonnet she wore. She learned to move differently, to walk with the rolling gait that conserved energy, to lift with her legs instead of her back. And she learned about Asher Thompson in small increments, details dropped in brief comments between long stretches of silence. He was 26, had been ranching since he was old enough to sit a horse. His father had died when he was 12, and he had run the family ranch with his mother until her death 3 years ago. He had a younger sister who had married and moved to California. He read books, which surprised her until she thought about the long, lonely evenings in a ranch house with no other company. He had been engaged once, to a woman from Kingman, but she had broken it off when she realized how isolated ranch life truly was. She wanted a house in town, neighbors, church socials, he said one morning as they rode out to check the herd. Could not blame her. It is not a life for everyone. But it is a life for you, Natalie said. It is the only life I know. He glanced at her. What about you? What was your life back east? Service. I worked in a boarding house, before that an orphanage. She kept her voice neutral, not wanting pity. Nothing worth returning to. No family at all. My parents died when I was 8. Cholera, I had no siblings. My uncle Marcus was my father's brother, but they had some falling out years before. I barely remember meeting him. So you came all this way for a man you did not know, to claim a property you had never seen. I came because it was the only chance I had to be something other than a servant or a wife." She said it defiantly, expecting judgment. Instead, he just nodded. "That is honest, at least." On the 15th day, as they were mending yet another section of fence, a rider approached from town. It was the sheriff, a portly man named Garrett who had introduced himself to Natalie the one time she had gone into Chloride for supplies. He dismounted with a grunt, mopping his forehead with a handkerchief. "Miss Sullivan, Asher," he nodded to them both. "Got some news you should hear. There has been a man asking around town about the Sullivan property. Wants to know if you are looking to sell." Natalie straightened, pushing her hair back from her face. "Who is he?" "Name is Carlton Hayes. Represents a cattle syndicate out of Kingman. They have been buying up smaller ranches, consolidating them into larger operations." The sheriff's tone was carefully neutral, but she caught an undertone of disapproval. "He is offering cash from what I hear." "How much?" Asher asked before Natalie could respond. "Did not say exact figures." "But Miss Sullivan, I should tell you, the other ranchers he has made offers to have been lowballed significantly. These syndicates know small operations are struggling. They wait until people are desperate, then offer pennies on the dollar." Natalie felt her jaw tighten. "I am not interested in selling." "You might want to hear him out," the sheriff said. "No shame in admitting when something is beyond your means. Your uncle, God rest him, he tried for years and could not make it work." "I am not my uncle." She kept her voice firm even as doubt gnawed at her. "Please tell Mr. Hayes I appreciate his interest, but the ranch is not for sale." The sheriff looked like he wanted to argue, but Asher cut in. "You heard the lady, Sheriff. Anything else?" "Just looking out for her best interests," the sheriff said stiffly. "It is a hard life out here for a woman alone." After he left, Natalie and Asher stood in silence for a long moment. Finally, Asher said, "You know, he is probably right, about the syndicate offering you a bad deal, but also about how hard this is. Are you suggesting I should sell?" She turned on him, suddenly furious, all the frustration and exhaustion of the past weeks bubbling over. "After all this work, all the time you have spent teaching me, now you think I should give up? I am not saying that." His voice stayed level, maddeningly calm. "I am saying you need to go into this with your eyes open. Your uncle had years of experience and he still could not save this place. You have 3 weeks. So what then? I should just accept that I am not good enough, that I should go crawling back east with whatever pittance they offer me. I am saying you need a plan beyond just working yourself to death and hoping for the best." She wanted to scream at him, but a traitorous part of her knew he was right. She had been so focused on learning, on surviving day to day, that she had not thought about the larger picture. 20 cattle, even if she kept them all alive and healthy, were not enough to sustain a ranch. She needed more stock, which required money she did not have. She needed equipment, supplies, help. The list of needs was endless and her resources were nearly depleted. "Then help me make a plan," she said finally, her anger draining away into exhaustion. "Please." He studied her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing something, making some kind of decision. "All right, but first we need to know exactly what you are working with. Tomorrow we do a full inventory. Every asset, every debt. Then we figure out what is possible." That night, Natalie sat at her uncle's small table and went through the papers the lawyer had sent her, really examining them for the first time. There were ledgers showing the ranch's finances over the past 5 years, a slow decline into debt. Her uncle had borrowed money from the bank in Kingman, using the land as collateral. The amount still owed made her stomach clench, $800, a fortune she could never hope to raise. And the payment was due in 4 months. When Asher arrived the next morning, she showed him the ledgers, watching his expression grow increasingly grim as he read. "Did you know about this?" she asked. "I knew he had borrowed money. I did not know how much." He set the ledger down. "This changes things." "Meaning what?" "Meaning that syndicate is probably hoping you will default on the loan so they can buy the property from the bank for even less. They might have already made a deal." The betrayal of it, the calculated cruelty, made her feel sick. "So no matter what I do, I lose." "Not necessarily." He stood, pacing the small room like a caged animal. "If you could make the payment, the land stays yours. That gives you more time to build up the herd to make the ranch profitable." "With what money?" "I have $17 left." "There are ways." He stopped pacing, looking at her intently. "You could take on a partner, someone who would invest capital in exchange for a share of the ranch." "Who would want to partner with a failing ranch and an inexperienced owner?" "I would." The words hung in the air between them. Natalie stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What?" "I would invest the $800, clear your debt. In exchange, I would own 50% of the ranch. We would work it together, split the profits." He said it matter-of-factly, as if he were proposing a simple business transaction rather than tying his fortunes to her disaster of a property. "Why would you do that? You have your own ranch." "My ranch is doing well enough, but it is small. Your uncle's land borders mine. Combined, we would have enough acreage to support a larger herd to weather bad seasons. It makes sense from a business perspective." She wanted to believe it was that simple, but the way he would not quite meet her eyes made her suspicious. "And what is the real reason?" He turned away, looking out the window at the harsh landscape. "I told you my fiancée left because she could not handle the isolation, the loneliness. She said I was married to the ranch, that there was no room for anything else. Maybe she was right. But these past weeks, working with someone else, teaching you, having a reason to ride over here every morning, I realized I have been lonely too. I am not proposing marriage or anything like that," he added quickly. "Just partnership, someone to share the work and the risk." Natalie felt her heart beating hard in her chest. It was an enormous decision, to tie herself legally and financially to someone she had known less than a month. But what choice did she really have? Without his help, she would lose everything. And if she was honest with herself, the thought of him not coming every morning, of facing this vast, difficult landscape alone, filled her with a dread she did not want to examine too closely. 50% seems like a lot," she said carefully. "You are taking on a partner with no experience and a mountain of problems." Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. "What are you proposing?" 60% for me, 40 for you. It is still my family's land, but I will work it alongside you, equal labor." Equal labor means equal say in decisions, an equal share of profits. She thought about it, weighing pride against pragmatism. "All right, 50-50 on decisions and profits, but I keep 60% ownership. If you ever want to sell your share, I have first right to buy it back." He extended his hand. "Deal." She shook his hand, his palm rough and warm against hers, and felt the trajectory of her life shift once again. For better or worse, she now had a partner. They rode into Kingman 3 days later to make the loan payment and sign the partnership papers. The bank manager looked shocked when they walked in together. Even more shocked when Asher handed over $800 in cash and asked for the lien on the Sullivan property to be released. Natalie signed the papers with a hand that shook slightly, watching her uncle's name crossed out and replaced with hers and Asher's together. "You are making a mistake, Thompson," the bank manager said as they prepared to leave. "That property is a money pit." "Then I guess it is my money to waste," Asher replied evenly. On the ride back, Natalie felt lighter than she had since arriving in Arizona, despite the weight of the new obligations she had taken on. The debt was cleared. She had a partner who knew what he was doing. For the first time, the idea of actually succeeding seemed possible rather than just a desperate fantasy. "What now?" she asked as they rode side by side through the evening light. "Now we get to work. Real work." He glanced at her. "You have done well so far, but everything up to now has just been triage, keeping things from getting worse. If we are going to build this into a real ranch, we need to work harder and smarter. I am ready. We will see." He was true to his word. The work intensified immediately. Asher moved some of his own cattle onto her property, nearly 50 head that suddenly made the place feel like a real ranch. They worked from dawn to well past dusk, him teaching her everything from how to brand cattle to how to deliver a calf, how to track strays, and how to detect predators. He was a hard taskmaster, demanding and exacting, but she learned quickly that he never asked her to do anything he would not do himself, and he never treated her as less capable simply because she was a woman. The summer heat grew brutal, temperatures soaring over 100 degrees by midday. They adjusted their schedule, working in the early morning and late evening, resting during the worst of the afternoon heat. Sometimes they worked in a comfortable silence. Other times they talked, sharing stories and opinions, learning each other's rhythms. She discovered he had a dry sense of humor that emerged occasionally, usually when she least expected it. He discovered she was more stubborn than he had initially believed, refusing to quit even when exhaustion made her sway in the saddle. One evening in late July, as they sat on her porch sharing a meal of beans and salt pork, she asked the question that had been building in her mind. "Do you regret it, the partnership?" He took his time answering, chewing slowly. "Ask me again in a year. That is not an answer. It is the only honest one I have right now." He looked at her, his expression serious. "This is not easy what we are doing. There will be setbacks. Cattle will die, equipment will break, we will have years when the rain does not come or comes too much. I can teach you everything I know, but I cannot guarantee success. I am not asking for guarantees. I am asking if you are sorry you tied yourself to me in this place." "No," he said after a moment. "I am not sorry. Are you?" She thought about it honestly. The work was back-breaking, the conditions harsh, and she went to bed every night exhausted to her bones. But she was building something, had ownership and agency over her own life for the first time ever. And she had someone who looked at her not as a servant or a burden but as a partner, someone worth investing in. "No," she said. "I am not sorry either." August brought new challenges. A pack of coyotes killed 2 calves before they managed to track down and shoot the alpha pair. A monsoon storm flooded the creek, washing out a section of fence they had just repaired. Natalie caught a fever that laid her up for 3 days, during which Asher did both their shares of work and came to the house twice a day to bring her water and make sure she was still breathing. She was delirious with fever the second night, and she woke at one point to find him sitting in the chair beside her bed, dozing upright, his hat pulled low over his face. The sight of him there, choosing to watch over her rather than ride back to his own house, did something strange to her heart. When the fever broke, he was still there, awake now and reading one of her uncle's books by lamplight. "You did not have to stay," she said, her voice hoarse. He looked up, and she saw the relief flash across his face before he shuddered it. "Partners look out for each other." "Is that all we are? Partners?" The question surprised her as much as him. She had not planned to ask it, but something about the vulnerability of illness, of having been cared for, loosened her tongue. He set the book down slowly, and she saw him choosing his words with care. "What else would we be? I do not know. Friends, maybe, maybe." He stood, stretching muscles stiff from sitting. "Get some rest. I will come back tomorrow to check on you." But as he walked to the door, she called out, "Asher." He paused, looking back. "Thank you for staying." "You are welcome, Natalie." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it lingered in the room long after he left. She recovered slowly, frustrated by her body's weakness after days of fever. Asher insisted she take it easy, doing lighter work while she rebuilt her strength. They fell into a new pattern, him arriving each morning and often not leaving until after supper, the two of them sharing meals and conversation as the boundaries between work and friendship blurred. She found herself watching him more, noticing things she had been too busy or too tired to see before. The way his hands moved with such sureness and skill. The rare smile that transformed his face from harsh to handsome. The way he listened when she spoke, really listened as if her thoughts and opinions mattered. And she caught him watching her too sometimes, his expression unreadable, something in his eyes that made her breath catch. By September, the worst of the heat had passed and the ranch was in better shape than it had been in years. The fences were solid, the herd was healthy, and they had even managed to add a few more head by trading labor with neighboring ranchers. Natalie had transformed from a soft Eastern girl into someone brown and lean and capable, someone who could ride all day and rope a calf and read the signs of weather in the sky. She barely recognized herself when she caught her reflection in the wavy glass of the window. One evening in late September, as they worked together to repair the barn roof before the winter rains came, Asher asked, "Do you ever miss it? Boston?" "I miss knowing what I am doing," she admitted, balancing on the ladder as she handed him shingles. "Everything here is still so new. I feel like I am constantly one mistake away from disaster. That is ranching. That is life out here." He nailed down a shingle with quick, efficient strikes. "But you have gotten better. You trust yourself more." "I trust you," she said without thinking. "I trust that you will tell me when I am about to do something stupid." He paused in his work, looking down at her from his perch on the roof. "That is probably the nicest thing anyone has said to me in years. You need to spend time with nicer people then." He laughed, a real laugh, and the sound of it made her smile wide enough that her face hurt. They finished the roof as the sun set, both of them filthy and tired but satisfied with the work. As Asher prepared to ride home, he hesitated. "There is a dance in Chloride this Saturday. For the Harvest Festival. You should come." She looked down at herself, at her worn dress and work-roughened hands. "I do not think I am fit for a dance anymore. Everyone in town knows you have been working the ranch. No one expects you to look like you just stepped out of a ballroom. Besides, it would be good for people to see that the Sullivan place has new life in it. Good for business." "Is that why you are inviting me? For business?" He met her eyes and something passed between them, a current of possibility that made her pulse quicken. "That is one reason. Come. I will pick you up at 6. She spent the next 2 days in a state of nervous anticipation that had nothing to do with ranching and everything to do with the way Asher had looked at her when he issued the invitation. She washed her hair 3 times trying to get all the dust out, and she spent an evening mending the least worn of her dresses, a simple blue cotton that had been fine for a servant but felt shabby for a dance. When Saturday arrived, she almost convinced herself not to go, certain she would embarrass herself or him or both. But at 6 o'clock she was ready, her hair pinned up, her dress pressed, her heart hammering like she was heading into battle. Asher arrived in a wagon rather than on horseback, cleaned up in a way she had never seen him, his hair still damp from washing, wearing a clean shirt and vest. When he saw her, his eyes widened slightly and he actually smiled. "You look nice," he said simply. "So do you." They rode into town in a silence that was charged with things neither of them seemed ready to say. The dance was held in the largest building in Chloride, a hall that usually served as a church on Sundays and a meeting place the rest of the week. It was packed with people from the surrounding ranches and the town itself, everyone dressed in their best clothes, a fiddle and guitar providing music. Natalie felt suddenly shy, aware of how many eyes turned toward her and Asher when they entered together. Miss Sullivan. The sheriff's wife, a plump, friendly woman named Martha, descended on her immediately. "How wonderful to see you. We have all been so curious about how you are managing out at the ranch. And Asher Thompson, I heard about your partnership. How enterprising." The way she said it, with a knowing gleam in her eye, made Natalie's cheeks heat. But before she could respond, other women surrounded her, asking questions, offering advice, welcoming her into the community in a way she had not expected. She had been so focused on the work, she had not realized how isolated she had become. It felt good to talk to other women, to share stories and laughter. But through it all, she was aware of Asher, watching her from across the room where he talked with a group of men. Their eyes met several times, and each time she felt that same flutter of possibility. When the music shifted to a waltz, Asher crossed the room and extended his hand. "Dance with me." She took his hand, letting him lead her onto the floor. She had learned to dance in the orphanage, basic steps taught by a matron who believed all girls should have some social graces. But dancing with Asher was nothing like those awkward childhood lessons. He held her with confidence, guiding her through the steps, and she was acutely aware of his hand on her waist, the breadth of his shoulders, the way he smelled of soap and something earthy and male. "You dance well," she said, needing to break the tension. "My mother insisted I learn." Said no son of hers would be a barbarian. His voice was warm, nostalgic. "She made me practice with her in the parlor. I thought it was the stupidest thing in the world. And now I am grateful." His hand tightened slightly on her waist. "Natalie, I need to tell you something." Her heart leapt into her throat. "What?" But before he could answer, someone tapped him on the shoulder. Carlton Hayes, the man from the cattle syndicate, stood there with an oily smile. "Excuse me, may I cut in?" "No," Asher said flatly. "Now, that is hardly polite." Hayes looked at Natalie. "I have been hoping to speak with Miss Sullivan. I believe my associate contacted you about selling your property." "I already said no," Natalie replied, staying firmly in Asher's arms. "Yes, but I am not sure you understand the full scope of what you are attempting. A woman alone trying to run a ranch. It is admirable, truly, but also unrealistic. My syndicate is prepared to offer you a very generous price, enough to set you up comfortably somewhere more suitable." "She is not alone," Asher said, his voice cold, "and the answer is still no. Now, if you will excuse us." He swept Natalie away to the other side of the floor, leaving Hayes standing alone, but the spell of the moment was broken. When the dance ended, Asher suggested they get some air and they walked out into the cool night. "I am sorry about that," he said. Hayes is a vulture. He sees struggling ranches as opportunities. It is fine. I just do not understand why he cannot accept no for an answer. Because men like him think they can wear you down, that eventually you will get tired or scared and give in. He turned to face her, his expression serious. "But you are not going to do that, are you?" "No, this is my home now, our home," she corrected. "I am not giving up on it." "Good." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face as if he wanted to touch her but was not sure he should. "Natalie, what I was trying to say before we were interrupted. These past months working with you, I have realized something." "What?" She barely breathed the word. "That this partnership we formed, it is not enough anymore, not for me." He dropped his hand, looking frustrated with himself. "I am not saying this right. I am no good with words." "Just say what you mean," she said softly. "I care about you, more than just as a partner, more than I should probably, considering how new all this is. But I am tired of pretending I do not notice the way you push your hair back when you are thinking, or the way you bite your lip when you are concentrating. I am tired of riding home at night and wishing I had an excuse to stay longer. I am just tired of not telling you the truth." Joy surged through her, bright and overwhelming. "Why did you think you should not care about me? Because it is too soon. Because we have a business arrangement and I do not want to complicate that. Because I am terrified you do not feel the same way and I will ruin everything." She stepped closer to him, looking up into his face. "And if I told you I do feel the same way, that I started caring about you somewhere between learning to mend fences and watching you deliver that calf in the rain, what would you say then?" His eyes searched her face, and she saw hope and fear warring in his expression. "I would say I want to court you properly, not just work together but actually court you, like you deserve. We have been working side by side in the sun and dust for months. I think we have moved past the stage of formal courting, do you not? Maybe, but I still want to do this right." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Natalie Sullivan, may I court you with the intention of marriage?" The formality of it, after everything they had already been through together, made her smile even as tears pricked her eyes. "Yes, Asher Thompson. You may." He kissed her then, careful and gentle, as if she were something precious that might break. She kissed him back, pouring into it all the loneliness and fear and hope she had carried since arriving in Arizona. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and he rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "I wish you had not waited so long." They stayed outside for a long time, talking in low voices about their feelings, about when they had started to change, about what came next. It was agreed that they would continue as they had been, working the ranch together, but now with the understanding that they were building toward a future that included more than just business. The idea filled Natalie with a happiness so fierce it frightened her. She had come west expecting nothing, and now she had land and purpose, and a man who looked at her like she was the answer to something. The winter that followed was mild by Arizona standards, but still harsh enough to test them. They lost 3 head to disease, and a winter storm damaged one of the sheds badly enough that it had to be rebuilt. But they also had successes. The remaining herd stayed healthy, and in February, a number of the cows gave birth to strong calves. Asher spent more and more time at Natalie's house, often staying late into the evening, and slowly they learned each other in deeper ways. She discovered that he had nightmares sometimes, legacies of a hard childhood after his father died. He discovered that she sang to herself when she thought no one was listening, old songs from the orphanage, her voice sweet and a little sad. In March, on a day when the sky was bright blue and the desert was dotted with wildflowers from an unexpected rain, Asher rode over in the morning and did not dismount. Instead, he gestured for Natalie to get her horse. "Where are we going?" she asked. "You will see. Trust me." She did trust him completely, so she saddled her mare and followed him out across the property. They rode for over an hour, crossing into his land and then beyond, climbing into the hills until they reached a spot that overlooked both their ranches and the town of Chloride in the distance. The view was breathtaking, the land spread out below them in shades of gold and green and red. "I used to come here when I was younger," Asher said, dismounting. "When things got hard or I needed to think. It reminded me why I was working so hard, what I was trying to build." Natalie slid from her horse, standing beside him. "It is beautiful, it is, but that is not why I brought you here." He turned to face her, and she saw nervousness in his expression, a vulnerability he rarely showed. "Natalie, these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. I wake up every morning excited to see you, to work beside you. You have taken a dying ranch and helped bring it back to life, but more than that, you have brought me back to life. I did not realize how alone I was until you were not there anymore." Her throat tightened with emotion. "Asher, let me finish." He took her hands, holding them between his. "I know we have only known each other since June. I know some people will say it is too fast, but I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to build this ranch with you, raise a family with you, grow old watching sunsets with you. So I am asking, Natalie Sullivan, will you marry me?" She had known this was coming, had been expecting it for weeks, but hearing the actual words still made her breath catch. She looked at this man who had taught her everything, who had believed in her when she barely believed in herself, who had taken a risk on a frightened Eastern girl with nothing to offer but stubbornness. She thought about the life they had already begun to build together, the easy partnership that had grown into something deeper and richer than she had ever imagined possible. "Yes," she said, the word coming out choked with tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." He kissed her then, under the wide Arizona sky, and she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. When they finally pulled apart, he reached into his pocket and produced a simple gold band. "It was my grandmother's," he said, sliding it onto her finger. "My mother left it to me before she died. She said to give it to someone who understood what it meant to build a life from nothing but work and hope." Natalie looked at the ring, worn smooth by years of wear, and felt the weight of the trust he was placing in her. "I will honor it." "I know you will." They rode back down the mountain engaged, and Natalie felt like she was flying rather than riding. Everything she had lost, everything she had run from, had led her to this moment, this place, this man. The ranch that had seemed like such a burden now felt like a gift, the foundation of a future she was building with her own hands. They were married in May, a simple ceremony in the church in Chloride with the whole town in attendance. Natalie wore a dress that Martha, the sheriff's wife, helped her sew, white cotton with lace at the collar, and she carried wildflowers picked from the property that morning. Asher wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortable but devastatingly handsome, and when he promised to love and honor her for the rest of his life, she saw the truth of it in his eyes. The wedding breakfast was held at the ranch, tables set up in the yard, the whole community coming together to celebrate. People brought food and gifts, practical things like blankets and tools and livestock, helping to stock the household for the newlyweds. The sheriff made a toast about young love and new beginnings, and Martha cried happy tears into her handkerchief. As the sun began to set and people started to leave, Natalie stood with Asher's arm around her waist, looking out at the property that was now truly theirs, not just as partners but as husband and wife. "Happy," Asher murmured into her hair. "So happy I am afraid I will wake up and find it was all a dream." "Not a dream. This is real." He turned her to face him. "You and me building this life together, that is as real as anything gets." That night, in the house that was now theirs together, Asher made love to her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. He treated her like she was infinitely precious, learning her body with the same patience and care he had shown teaching her to ranch. And afterward, lying in his arms in the darkness, she felt a completeness she had never known existed. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. There were hard seasons and good seasons, times when they worried they would lose everything and times when they celebrated small victories. In the spring of 1888, Natalie discovered she was pregnant, and Asher cried actual tears of joy when she told him. Their son was born in January of 1889, a healthy boy they named Marcus after her uncle, whose legacy had brought them together. Holding her baby for the first time, Natalie thought about the frightened girl who had stepped off the train in Kingman less than 3 years before. She had been so lost, so uncertain, with nothing but a desperate hope that there might be something better waiting for her out west. She had found so much more than better. She had found home. She had found purpose. She had found a man who loved her not despite her inexperience, but because of her willingness to try, to learn, to fight for what mattered. Baby Marcus was colicky and demanding, keeping them both up many nights, but neither of them complained. Asher was a devoted father, taking the baby for hours so Natalie could rest, walking the floor and singing in his rough, off-key voice. Watching him with their son, Natalie fell in love with him all over again in a new way. By the time Marcus was a year old, the ranch was thriving in a way it never had under her uncle's ownership. The herd had grown to over 200 head, and they had added chickens and pigs, diversifying their income. They had hired a young cowboy named Pete to help with the work, and Asher had started talking about building a proper barn, something large enough to handle their expanding operation. In the evenings, after Marcus was asleep, they would sit on the porch together, Natalie in the rocking chair Asher had built for her and Asher on the steps, watching the sun set over the land they had claimed and cultivated. Sometimes they talked about the future, about the children they hoped to have, about the legacy they wanted to build. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from truly knowing another person. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had sold to the syndicate?" Asher asked one evening. Natalie considered it. "Sometimes. I suppose I would have gone back east, found some other form of work, maybe married eventually if I was lucky." "I would have bought your land," he said quietly. "If you had sold, I had already decided I would be the buyer. I could not stand the thought of a syndicate taking over, but more than that, I could not stand the thought of you leaving." She turned to look at him, surprised. "You never told me that." "You needed to make your own choice, not be influenced by what I wanted." He smiled slightly. "But I am glad you chose to stay. I am glad you chose to trust me." "Trust," she repeated, thinking about that word and all it encompassed. When she had first arrived, she had trusted no one, scared and alone and convinced that everyone would take advantage of her ignorance. Asher had taught her that trust was not weakness but strength, that allowing someone to help you did not diminish you but made you both stronger. He had taught her to trust herself, to believe she was capable of more than she had ever imagined, and in doing so, he had earned her complete trust in return. "What are you thinking?" he asked, watching her face. "I am thinking that I love you, that I am grateful for every day we have together." He climbed the steps and pulled her into his arms, careful not to disturb the rhythm of the rocking chair. "I love you too, more than I have words to say." In 1890, Natalie gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Sarah, and the house that had once seemed so empty was suddenly bursting with noise and life. Asher expanded the building, adding 2 more rooms, and Natalie planted a garden that actually grew despite the harsh climate. The ranch continued to prosper, and they paid off the last of the debts that had haunted her uncle. On the 5th anniversary of the day Natalie had arrived in Arizona, Asher surprised her with a trip to Kingman. They left the children with Martha, the sheriff's wife, and rode out together, spending 2 days in town like they were courting again. He bought her a new dress, a beautiful blue that matched her eyes, and took her to dinner at the nicest restaurant in town. That night, in a hotel room that felt luxurious after years of ranch living, he made love to her and told her all the ways she had changed his life for the better. "I was so lonely before you came," he said, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "I did not even realize how much until it was gone. You brought light into my life, Natalie. You and the children, you are everything to me." "You saved me," she replied softly. "When I got off that train, I was so scared. I thought I had made the worst mistake of my life. But you saw something in me worth investing in, worth teaching. You gave me a chance when you could have just bought me out or let me fail. I saw a woman who was brave enough to travel halfway across the country for a chance at something better. I saw someone who worked until her hands bled and never complained. How could I not help someone like that?" They returned to the ranch renewed, falling back into the rhythms of work and family with renewed appreciation for what they had built. Marcus was old enough now to follow his father around, trying to help with the chores, and the twins were crawling everywhere, getting into everything. The house was chaotic and loud and filled with love. In 1892, Natalie gave birth to another son, Andrew, and Asher joked that they were building their own ranch crew. But behind the joke was genuine happiness. He had grown up essentially alone after his father died, and he loved being part of a large family, loved the noise and energy of children everywhere. The ranch continued to expand. They bought the neighboring property when the owner retired and moved to California, nearly doubling their acreage. They built a proper barn, a large, sturdy structure that could withstand the worst weather. They added a bunkhouse for the 3 cowhands they now employed. What had started as a failing ranch worked by 2 inexperienced partners had become one of the most successful operations in the region. But for Natalie, the greatest success was not measured in cattle or land, but in the life she had built with Asher. She watched him with their children, patient and loving, teaching them the same lessons he had taught her about hard work and integrity. She saw the respect he showed her, never making a major decision without consulting her, always treating her as an equal partner, even when the rest of the world saw wives as property. She felt his love in 1,000 small gestures. The way he brought her coffee in the morning, the way he rubbed her feet after a long day, the way he still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen even after years of marriage and 4 children. One evening when she was 30 years old, 10 years after arriving in Arizona, she stood on the porch of their home watching the sun set. The house had been expanded twice, and now wrapped around with a proper porch on 3 sides. The yard was fenced and neat, with her garden flourishing in the back. In the distance, she could see their cattle grazing, healthy and numerous. The children were inside, Marcus helping the twins with their lessons while Andrew napped, and Asher was in the barn finishing the evening chores. She thought about the girl she had been, terrified and alone, stepping into a disaster of a ranch with no idea what she was doing. She thought about all the moments when she could have given up, sold out, gone back to the safety and certainty of the East. She thought about the choice to trust Asher, to accept his partnership, to let herself fall in love with him. Every choice had led her here, to this moment, to this life that was so much richer and fuller than anything she had dared to dream. Asher came out of the barn and walked toward the house, and her heart still skipped a beat at the sight of him. He was 36 now, lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, his hair showing threads of silver at the temples. But to her, he was as handsome as the day he had ridden into her yard and offered to teach her about ranching. He climbed the porch steps and wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything. Nothing. Just how far we have come." "We have come far," he agreed, his breath warm against her ear. "But we still have a lot of future ahead of us." "I know. I am looking forward to it." They stood together as the sky turned from orange to purple to deep blue, watching the stars emerge one by one. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and dust and growing things, and from inside the house came the sound of their children laughing. This was home. This was family. This was everything she had ever wanted, even when she had not known enough to want it. "I love you," she said, turning in his arms to look up at him. "I love you too." He kissed her softly, a promise and a renewal. Always. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. In 1895, Natalie gave birth to their last child, a daughter they named Abigail after Asher's first wife, honoring the woman whose loss had so deeply affected her uncle. It felt right, tying together the past and the present, acknowledging that their happiness was built on foundations laid by those who came before. Marcus grew into a capable young man, passionate about ranching like his father, already talking about the day when he would run the operation. The twins were inseparable, bright and curious girls who loved to ride and had no interest in the traditional female accomplishments. Andrew was quieter, thoughtful, preferring books to cattle, but still pulling his weight on the ranch. And little Abigail was spoiled by everyone, the baby who would always be the baby even as she grew. In 1898, Natalie and Asher celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary with a party that drew people from all over the county. The ranch house was packed with friends and neighbors, all of them celebrating not just a marriage but a success story. The Sullivan-Thompson Ranch had become a model for the region, proof that hard work and partnership could overcome even the longest odds. During the party, the sheriff, now gray-haired and planning his retirement, raised a toast. "When Miss Sullivan first arrived here, many of us thought she would be gone within a month. The ranch was a disaster, and she was just a girl from back east with no experience. But she proved us all wrong. She learned, she fought, she refused to give up. And when Asher Thompson offered to partner with her, some folks said he was crazy, throwing good money after bad. But they built something together, something strong and lasting. They are proof that with enough determination and the right partner, anything is possible." To Natalie and Asher Thompson. The room erupted in cheers and applause, and Natalie felt tears sting her eyes. She looked at Asher, who was grinning and shaking hands with well-wishers, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the path her life had taken. Every hardship, every moment of doubt, had been worth it to arrive at this place of belonging and purpose. Later, when the guests had gone home and the children were asleep, she and Asher sat on the porch in the darkness, holding hands like teenagers. "Can you believe it has been 10 years?" she asked. "Some days it feels like yesterday. Other days it feels like you have always been here." He squeezed her hand. "I cannot imagine my life without you. You do not have to. I am not going anywhere." "Good. Because I am not done building our life together. We still have decades ahead of us, God willing." She rested her head on his shoulder, content and complete. "Then let us make them good decades, full of love and family and watching our children grow. And maybe some grandchildren eventually," he added with a smile in his voice. "Not too soon. Let them be children a while longer." They sat together in the comfortable silence of long marriage, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the cattle settling, the horses shifting in the barn, the cry of a distant coyote. This was their kingdom, built from nothing but determination and trust. This was their legacy, not just in land and cattle but in the children they were raising and the love they had nurtured. As the years rolled on, that legacy continued to grow. Marcus did eventually take over most of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, freeing Asher and Natalie to slow down slightly, though neither of them ever truly retired. The twins married, Emma to a banker in Kingman and Sarah to a neighboring rancher, and both gave birth to grandchildren that Natalie and Asher doted on shamelessly. Andrew became a lawyer, moving to Phoenix but visiting often. Abigail showed signs of being as stubborn and determined as her mother, already announcing at age 8 that she would run the ranch with Marcus someday. In 1905, when Natalie was 43 and Asher 48, they took a trip back east so she could show him where she had come from. They visited Boston, and she showed him the boarding house where she had worked, the orphanage where she had grown up. He held her hand as she told him stories of her childhood, the loneliness and fear that had defined those years. And then they returned to Arizona, to the ranch, to the life they had built together. "I am glad you had those hard years," Asher said on the train ride home. "Not because I wanted you to suffer, but because they made you who you are. They gave you the strength to take a chance on a dying ranch and a stranger's offer of help." "I am glad too," Natalie agreed. "Everything I went through led me to you. How could I regret that?" They arrived home to a house full of grandchildren visiting for the summer. Chaos and noise and sticky hands and endless questions. Natalie and Asher looked at each other over the heads of the children and smiled, united in their love for this messy, beautiful life. In 1910, on a warm June evening very much like the evening they had first met, Natalie and Asher sat on the porch of their home, now grandparents in their 50s, looking out at the ranch that had become an empire. The property stretched as far as the eye could see, fences strong and straight, buildings solid and well-maintained, cattle dotting the landscape. It was unrecognizable from the wreck Natalie had first encountered 25 years before. "You remember the first time you rode up to this house?" Natalie asked, her hand in his, their fingers intertwined with the ease of decades of practice. "I remember thinking you would never make it," Asher admitted. "You looked so small and scared standing on that porch like you were ready to cry." "I was ready to cry. I was terrified." "But you did not cry. You lifted your chin and told me you would learn, and you did. You learned everything I could teach you and then some." She leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "I could not have done it without you." "You taught me about more than ranching, Asher. You taught me to trust myself, to trust you, to trust that taking risks could lead to something beautiful." "You taught me things too," he said quietly. "Before you came, I had given up on the idea of having a real partner, someone to share everything with. I thought I would spend my life alone, married to the land. But you showed me that life is so much richer when you have someone to build it with. Someone who challenges you and supports you and loves you even when you are being stubborn." "We are both stubborn," she pointed out with a laugh. "That is why we work so well together." They sat in peaceful silence as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold. In the house behind them, they could hear the sounds of family. Their children and grandchildren gathered for Sunday dinner, the weekly tradition that had become sacred. Soon Marcus would call them in to eat, and they would sit at the long table Asher had built years ago, surrounded by the people their love had created. But for now, in this quiet moment, it was just the two of them, the way it had been in the beginning. A cowboy and an Eastern girl taking a chance on each other, building something from nothing through hard work and trust and love that grew deeper with every passing year. "Thank you," Natalie said softly. "For what? For seeing me. For believing in me. For teaching me that I was capable of more than I ever imagined." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles tenderly. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, for staying when you could have left, for building this life with me." "I would not want to be anywhere else," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Inside, someone called them to dinner, and they stood together, still holding hands. As they walked into the house filled with noise and love, and the rich smell of home cooking, Natalie thought about the journey that had brought her here. The letter that had arrived on a Tuesday morning in Boston. The train ride west. The shock of seeing the ruined ranch. The moment Asher rode into her yard and offered to help. Every step, every choice, every hardship had been worth it for this. A life rich with love, a family that surrounded her, and a partner who had walked beside her through it all. The years ahead would bring more changes, more challenges, more joys and sorrows. But whatever came, they would face it together, the way they always had. Two people who had taken a risk on trust and had been rewarded beyond measure. As they took their seats at the table, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Asher caught Natalie's eye and winked. She smiled back, her heart full to bursting with gratitude and love. This was her happily ever after, not a fairy tale ending but something better. A real, hard-won, deeply satisfying life built on partnership and trust and love that had only grown stronger with time. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything.